for most of my time as a serving police officer, when I heard the word cryptid used in connection with a case or an incident, I will do little more than roll my eyes and sigh, not because I was afraid of those so-called monsters or of things that go bump in the night, but because 9 times out of 10 when someone said cryptid, you knew the whole thing was going to be a wild goose chase. Most of these sightings turned out to be nothing, but that didn't mean that you wouldn't have to investigate it first. Cue 3 to 4 hours of traipsing around the fields with a flashlight, just looking for some beast or huge black cat like a puma, only for them to actually turn out to be someone's dog. Or a full half day crashing around in some damp woodland, desperately looking for a creature that just didn't even exist. I hated those jobs and usually saw them as nothing more than a complete waste of time. Well, usually. But then, of course, there is an exception to every rule. In my last year as a copper, I was involved with a case that definitely had the word cryptid attached to it, but far from it being a waste of time, it was the one case in 35 years on the job that still haunts me straight to this day. But for me, it wasn't the stories, all those myths and folktales that creep the other guys out. For me, it was the footage, the hard visual evidence of evil caught on film. That sort of stuff is hard to shake off. That stuff, as they say, it stays with you. The footage was shot by a young lad named Ivar Musen. He captured it in a small rural area called Carlston Mews. The little town up in the Peak District in Derbyshire is fringed by forests that rise up into the mountainside. It is a moderately popular site for hikers and campers in the spring and summer months. Most of the town's tourism trade is built around a supposed presence in the forest of a cryptid, a creature they refer to as Old Ogie. Now, I've looked this up since, and the closest thing I can find is this supposed monster outside of the area. It's this myth of a thing called Old Ogie. People in West Yorkshire used to threaten kids with it if they stole from orchards. If you take the apples, they'd say, then Old Ogie will come to eat you. That myth is clearly different, but the name is similar and the overall theme is the same, so there has to be some kind of link. A historian would probably be able to explain it, but that's not me. All I know is that in Carlston Mews, Old Ogie is a very old legend and was supposed to be some kind of demon thing. The drawings you saw of it, whether they were the inky woodcuts made in the 17th century, or modern sketches made after these supposed sightings, they all showed a thing that to me always looked like some kind of weird horned donkey. It would stand upright on its back 2 legs, with pretty much all of its hair removed. Its eyes in every drawing had no pupils to speak of, but they are instead white and perfectly round. They look like cue balls from a game of snooker. The mouth in the drawings always seemed to hang open, with these thick, heavy lips that showed rows of long, pointed teeth behind them. Most reports said that the thing stood around 7 feet tall. They say it could be heard for miles wailing in the forest, screaming in pain because it's cursed to always and forever be hungry. Now, on the face of things, I admit that sounds quite sinister, but then I suppose the idea of some prehistoric creature swimming around a loch in Scotland is actually disturbing, until that is, you see all the stuffed toys, novelty mugs and key rings. In Carlston Mews, Old Ogie isn't taken seriously by most, but it remains something of a celebrity because he's good for business. The local pub and restaurant is named after him. There are souvenir t-shirts, key rings and postcards, all with the old woodcut printed onto them. And the pubs are all stuffed with plenty of locals who will swear down that as kids they caught a glimpse of the old monster lurking up in the woods. It's no surprise then that every few years at least, there's a new report that Old Ogie has been sighted, usually accompanied by reports of sheep having been stolen or killed, and, if you're lucky, a grainy blur of a photograph showing something that could be a monster. but it could also be a tree, just something moving in the distance. So why all this fuss over what is essentially a local fairy tale? Well, it's very simple. It's a matter of economics. Every time the creature supposedly shows up, the town gets on the news and the tourism gets a boost. Outsiders are intrigued by the legend, and they may decide to stop in on what is otherwise an unremarkable little dot on the map. Local businesses get better trade, and everyone has more in their pocket. This is why I was not in the least bit surprised to hear that in the months after the pandemic, when much of the country was finally coming out of lockdown and small businesses were struggling to recover, Old Ogie suddenly decided to make an appearance. There were 2 stories that month, I remember. One saying that Old Ogie's wails had been heard in the forest, and even that he'd been heard close to the town in the middle of the night, costing locals their sleep and leading them to speculate in television interviews that, perhaps during the lockdown, the creature, like many animals during the quieter months, had ventured close to town. But my own conclusion as an ever-suspicious copper was that some local clown was going out to make the sounds in the hope of getting folks up. A few high-pitched wails and a few disgruntled townsfolk, and you were well on your way to making headlines and putting the town back in the spotlight. A clever little plan to drum up some business that only required a few early mornings and a bit of insane shouting. Pretty easy money. The second story, though, was different, and it was here that Ivar Musen got involved. Originally from Sweden, Ivar had moved to Derbyshire with his family a few years earlier, and then he became fascinated by the local folklore. Training to be a zoologist at a university in the city, he had spent months each summer researching local legends and trying, obviously unsuccessfully, to catch one of the fabled creatures on camera. He'd gone after everything from fairies and spirits to brownies, trolls and boggarts. Unbelievably, his YouTube channel, explaining the legends but then predictably showing trail cam footage videos, bad ones which showed nothing more interesting than a shadow or of course the odd badger, seemed to be really popular. I guess people's morbid curiosity sometimes just gets the better of them. I guess we all find ourselves trying to watch scary videos at some point or another. Hearing the reports about Old Ogie's supposed return to Carlston Mews, he packed up his tent and cameras and headed off into the woods. This is where things took a strange turn. The footage he collected never made it to YouTube, but I have seen it. It was discovered and given to the police about a month after it was shot, and I was forced to watch it as part of the investigation into Ivar's disappearance. I can honestly say that it's one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen, though perhaps not for the reasons that you may think. The clip begins with a jumble of jump cuts, shaky footage of Ivar talking directly to the camera as he puts up his tent in stages, as he explains that according to his research, this particular trail is the one where the cryptid, there's that word again, was most commonly spotted. We then see him setting up the trail cams and other recording equipment. He then ate his evening meal prepared on a camping stove, and he sat waiting quietly as the light around him begins to fade. I can honestly say that up until I saw that footage, I'd never believed a word of any of that cryptid mumbo-jumbo. But even so, seeing him sit there, alone in the forest as the light began to disappear, I admit it made me feel oddly uncomfortable. There was something about the way that the trees in the fading light seemed to come closer, as if with every minute as the sunlight seeped away, they were crowding the camp, huddled up to one another and closing in around him. He never mentioned it, and I think I know full well that it was an optical illusion caused by the encroaching darkness, but something about it still gave me a chill. Perhaps in a way, it was just a premonition, preparing me for what came next. According to the timer on the screen, the next piece of footage was taken at around 3:45 am. The main camera is fumbled around and we hear the sound of the zip being unfastened. And then Ivar steps quietly through the entrance of the tent. For a moment, everything is quiet, save for the sound of Ivar's breathing. This came in small snatches of shallow, excited breath. The camera itself is trained forwards, and in the green-black wash of night vision, we can see the outlines of trees and the wall of black beyond them. Again, a long stretch of silence. And then, a hollow snap. The crack of a branch is followed by another, and the accompanying sound, one of bracken and twigs being disturbed. Something out there, undoubtedly, is moving. To the left of the shot, out of focus and obscured by the trees, a shape, hunched and rounded, but clearly not a tree, sidles slowly through the blackness as Ivar's breathing quickens. There is another snap, closer now and clearly made by Ivar himself as he attempts with slow, careful movements to move closer and closer to whatever it is shifting around in the undergrowth. For a second, there is stillness as whatever's hiding there recognizes for the first time that it is not alone. Both it and Ivar freeze, remaining static, alert and poised. Then comes the howl. To call it a howl, though, is not quite accurate, because that makes you think of a dog or a wolf. This sound was neither. This was a bellowing screech, almost distorted. A noise that one of my colleagues said sounded more like it had been pulled out of the thing rather than willingly made by it. It was a low, mournful sound, as if whatever made it was in pain. And it was also deafeningly loud. Suddenly, there's a blur of movement. Ivar's camera tumbles forward as he darts in hurried steps somewhere to his left. And we see a shape. Massive but indistinct, it barges past like a charging bull, bursting through the foliage in a streak of grey-white skin and long, stretched-out limbs. I have paused and replayed those few seconds over and over and over. What I see in fragments, parts of a hand, the curve of a spine, and horns protruding upwards. Obscured by the trees, it's not, I don't think, a man, nor is it any animal I could identify. From the twisted shape and wild, hideous screams, though, I am still reluctant to call it a cryptid. To me, that thing is just a monster. The next thing you see on screen is a shot of a clearing, a small break between two large trees. The space between, a framed patch of jet black darkness, is interrupted only by the presence of two shining points. Eyes, round and pure white, like two giant pearls staring maliciously from the dark. For several moments, this shot is fixed. Ivar frozen in place and the eyes watching him in front. Off camera, a sound is heard as Ivar fumbles in his bag for a torch. When the beam finally bursts out, all you see is a mouth, wet, drooping lips with teeth jutting out from them. And then the thing in the torchlight steps slowly forwards. With each step forward, you feel Ivar retreat. His backward steps become more and more frantic and more hurried, picking up pace as he tries to keep the lens trained on the thing, but also keeping a distance between him and it. As the shape continues to move ever forward, Ivar abandons his quest. I can't help but think that this was for the best. As the shot jerks awkwardly round, you realise all at once that he is running, trying in frantic, stumbling strides to get away and out of the forest, out and back to the safety of the town. The shot swings wildly, veering from side to side as he runs, until all at once it settles on a new shape. Not some animal or creature in the dark, not Old Ogie and his misshapen hide, but a small, huddled group of men. They're bundled up in winter clothing with scarves pulled over their faces. We see rifles, shotguns raised and pointed. You at first assume this is the cavalry here to help, that the people in the town heard the thing's cries. They must have known that Ivar was there. and they valiantly came along to save him. You could assume that, but you'd be wrong. With a rifle aimed directly forwards, we hear a voice from behind a scarf give a straight command. "Turn around," it says, as if Ivar had no reason to bound through that forest. "Turn around and go back, or so help me God, I'll shoot you." For the next few minutes, we hear Ivar pleading, begging this small group of men not to send him back, not to force him to retreat and turn towards whatever it is waiting behind him. Off camera, now the howls are heard again. "Turn around and walk. Now," says the voice. "He's waiting for you." Forced by the threat of a bullet, Ivar slowly turns around. As the camera turns with him, angling back the way it came, we hear the branches snap and the sound of Ivar screaming. Around a month after I viewed this footage, after I went into town and interviewed several local men about their whereabouts on that night, the tape mysteriously vanished. One story I heard was that 2 men in suits from the government came to the police station and asked for it to be handed over. Another story said that it was carelessly disposed of and sold to some online collector. Whatever the explanation, the footage is gone, but I will never forget it. Whether other footage exists from Ivar's other trail cams or some other angle, and whether it will ever be released, I don't know. I have to say I would not be surprised if it was, or if the original footage did eventually emerge. That sort of stuff is valuable. Drip feeding that sort of thing through the internet would certainly attract attention. It would also fuel the mystery and bring more people to a town, a place already enjoying a boost in tourism since Ivar Musen's disappearance. Kind of sick, really. It seems since the pandemic that tourism is through the roof. Apparently people can't get enough of the town of Carlston Mews, a place where a boy was eaten by a monster.